We're following a developing story out of Waterbury. There's been an outside of the city's courthouse. Courtrooms are usually the scenes of legal dispute rather than violence. That if this case goes forward without any additional funding, there's no chance. But what happens when victims take matters into their own hands? From the mother who took revenge on her daughter's killer in the courtroom, to a gang member who was brutally murdered by over 200 women in broad daylight. These are the cases of convicts who got instantly killed in court. Klaus Grabowski. This is Marianne Bachmeier, the woman who would come to be known as Germany's revenge mother. And this is Klaus Grabowski, the brutal murderer who snatched the life of an innocent soul. On a fateful day in March 1981, the grieving mother walked into a courtroom in West Germany with a concealed gun, and within a split second she served proper justice for the man who took her daughter from her. Before the tragedy struck, Marianne was a single mother who ran a pub in the 1970s in the city of Lübeck, West Germany. All her life, Marianne had seen struggles of all kinds, from a troubled upbringing to having 2 children she had to put up for adoption. However, when she got pregnant again the 3rd time, Marianne decided to keep this one for herself, and she named the charming baby Anna. Anna was a ray of sunshine in Marianne's life. She brought a new kind of happiness that she hadn't felt in a long, long time. However, as they say, good things don't last long. And so was the story of Anna, who eventually became the victim of a psychopath. It was on May 5, 1980, when tragedy struck. On that day, 7-year-old Anna and her mother had a heated argument, and out of rebellion, she decided to skip school. Somehow, she found herself in the house of her 35-year-old neighbor, Klaus Grabowski. This guy wasn't the most upstanding citizen around, and as a matter of fact, he had previously served time for doing the unthinkable with a minor. But Grabowski wasn't a stranger to Anna, and this wasn't the first time she would go over to his place to play with his cat. However, this time Grabowski had deadly intentions towards the little girl. And after a few hours had passed, he pounced on little Anna and strangled her with a pantyhose. Whether or not Anna was defiled remains unknown, however. Grabowski completed his evil mission by stashing the child's body in a cardboard box and burying her on the banks of a nearby canal. But justice was not far behind, and it was on that very day that Grabowski got arrested after his fiancée alerted the cops. With all fingers pointing directly at him, he knew he couldn't run from this one, so he admitted to murdering the child but denied ever abusing her. Instead, he gave a more disturbing story. He claimed the 7-year-old tried to seduce him and even threatened to tell her mother he assaulted her if he didn't give her money. Not a lot of people bought that story, and the police definitely didn't. So the case headed to court, but that was where things got even worse. At the trial, Grabowski's lawyers put up a defense claiming that he acted out of a hormonal imbalance, which was caused by the voluntary castration procedure he underwent years prior. The story wasn't so amusing for Marianne, and each statement seemed like a punch to her chest. So on the 3rd day of the trial, she walked into that Lübeck district court with a .22 caliber Beretta pistol tucked within her purse. Her eyes were bloodshot, and it was obvious she was out for revenge. When she found a good vantage point, she pulled out that gun and aimed straight for Grabowski, firing 7 shots without batting an eyelid, 1 for each year Anna lived. Many called it a fitting end to such a psychopath, but the law still had to punish Marianne for the murder. During her murder trial, she spoke of taking Grabowski's life in a dream and seeing visions of her daughter. This solidified her resolve, and she had to do what she did. When the court asked her for a handwriting sample, she wrote, "I did it for you, Anna." The court slammed her with a 6-year sentence for premeditated manslaughter in 1983, and her conviction caused a few ruckus, as many argued that she wasn't supposed to serve any time for the act. Marianne would go on to spend only 3 years behind bars before she was released. Sadly, though, she was diagnosed with cancer and died on September 14, 1996 at the age of 46. She was buried right next to her daughter, Aku Yadav. This is Bharat Kalacharan, also known as Aku Yadav, an Indian gangster who was lynched in a courtroom in broad daylight. How did he get here, and what horrible crimes did he commit to deserve such a harsh punishment? To understand this chilling case, let's take a little trip back to the past. Before he met his inglorious end, Aku Yadav was a terror to the society. He was a robber, home invader, kidnapper, extortionist, and serial killer whose name struck fear in the hearts of everyone around. During his lifetime, Yadav took the lives of at least 3 individuals. He tortured and abducted people for ransom and assaulted over 40 women and underage girls. But for a very long time, he and his gangs were unstoppable since they had the police in their pockets. They would often give them money and even take them out for drinks in bars, so even when the women reported him to the police, their cases were thrown out the window. He terrorized the families, mostly those living in Kasturba Nagar, and he would sometimes barge into their houses demanding money. To keep the men under his toes, he would assault the women, and even children as young as 10 years old. This way, the men would not be able to rebel against him. It was said that during this time, every household in the area had at least one woman who had fallen victim to Yadav's assaults. One of their victims was a woman who had given birth just 10 days prior. Yadav and his men defiled the woman, who would later take her own life by immolation. Before you ask why the people didn't go to the police when the situation got so bad, they actually did. And as a matter of fact, the police arrested him 14 times. But what came out of it? Nothing. Yadav would simply be released right back onto the streets to keep terrorizing the people of the locality. After a whole decade of causing havoc and destroying the lives of the women and girls who lived in the area, all cases against him were dropped, and it looked as though the 32-year-old psychopath would get away with it. The story would eventually take a dark turn on August 13, 2004, during a bail hearing in India's Nagpur District Court. Word had spread that Yadav could be released that day, as the police had planned to keep him in custody until everyone had calmed down, then released him. Left with no choice but to take matters into their own hands, a mob of 200 to 400 women marched into the courthouse on that day, armed with vegetable knives and pepper spray. They took their seats in the front row as Yadav walked in confidently, knowing he was going to be a free man soon. During the court proceedings, he saw a woman he had assaulted in the past, and he laughed at her, calling her unprintable names. The police supposedly laughed too. Soon, another woman started hitting him in the head with a chapal, boldly declaring to Yadav that it was either she ended his life or he ended hers, saying, "We can't both live on this earth together. It's either you or me." Those bold words emboldened the other women, and before you could say Jack Robinson, Yadav was surrounded by the women who stabbed him a staggering 70 times. The chili powder was thrown in the faces of the officers who guarded him, and as they dealt the final punishment on him, he could be heard screaming and begging for forgiveness. The scene was very bloody, and one victim was said to have hacked off his private part. The police left the place dazed and horrified, but while the vigilante may be questionable, nobody really felt any pity for the brutal gangster. Although some of the women were charged with the murder, there wasn't enough evidence to convict them, and even if the case was pursued, the chances of their conviction was slim to none. So they were released, and today they are hailed as heroines in India. David Paradiso. While standing trial for stabbing his girlfriend, David Paradiso caused a huge chaos in the courtroom, a move that eventually led to his demise. The real reason Paradiso was in court that day was because of a brutal attack he launched on his innocent girlfriend, stabbing her in the neck and dumping her body near a road. The details of the crime were quite shocking, and they sent shockwaves through the community. On the day the crime was committed, Paradiso and his girlfriend Eileen Pelt were arguing at the back seat of his mom's car. Nobody could really remember what the fight was about, but it soon turned violent. The 29-year-old Paradiso would later claim he was suffering from paranoia at the time, and he actually believed that his girlfriend was going to take his life if he didn't attack first. After brutally murdering his girlfriend, Paradiso then took his mother hostage, forcing her to drive to the neighboring Amador County, where he disposed of the body. He was soon apprehended by the authorities, and the whirlwind trial began, although no one could predict that it would all end in tragedy. The nature of the case was very peculiar, but Paradiso's defense claimed he was high on hard drugs at the time of the incident, while his mother kept mentioning his deteriorating mental state. On March 4, 2009, the day of the attack, Paradiso took to the witness stand to retell his version of the story, and during the proceedings, the court decided to take a brief recess. But as the individuals filed out of the courtroom, Paradiso targeted the San Joaquin County Superior Court Judge Cinda Fox, who was sitting on the case, stabbing her with an unknown weapon. The whole courtroom was thrown into disarray, and during the chaos, the officers shot him in the head, ending his life in an instant. It was a brutal punctuation to a troubled life, but Paradiso's mother saw it coming. She claimed to have informed the officers about Paradiso's mental state and how he was prone to violence prior to the incident. She also mentioned how she had informed the officers that her son had a concealed weapon, but no one took her seriously. Thankfully, though, Judge Cinda Fox, who was a victim of the unexpected attack, only sustained minor injuries, and as she was wheeled out of the courtroom, she could be heard assuring reporters that she was okay. For Paradiso, though, that was the end of the road, and his story remains one of the most chilling examples of criminals getting unintended capital punishment right within the courtroom. Cial Angelou. This gang member was standing trial for several charges in a court in Salt Lake City when he made a stupid decision that ultimately ended his life abruptly. 25-year-old Cial Angelou was an alleged member of the Tongan Crip gang, one of the deadliest criminal groups in Utah. Angelou was part of the 17 suspects named in a 29-count racketeering indictment filed in 2008, accusing the gang members of conspiracy, assault, robbery, and illegal possession of weapons. The 6'3", 260-pound Angelou was also implicated in a string of robberies and assault on local store clerks. And in addition, he was accused of assaulting 2 federal officers as well as brandishing a firearm. The case had gone on for a while, and Angelou was the last defendant to stand trial.